Let's go ahead and get
4:30.
started. So, because I know you all are busy and I appreciate you being here. This is a delightful change for me because I've been on full-time coronavirus planning. So I am going to change gears enthusiastically.
Are you part of Instant Command?
I am. I'm at the emergency operations. Most of it. But, you know, once in a while I escape to do my day job.
So what's the new thing now? Are you?
The most recent development is it appears that all spring break international plans have been canceled. All IU-sponsored international spring break programs, that's what I draw. So you may not travel to level 3 countries. You can still travel internationally, but they're warning you that you may not get home if you do it over spring break. But the IU-sponsored international programs have been canceled for spring break, which makes sense because you could end up with a group of 20 students stuck somewhere that wasn't in an emergency situation when they arrived, but shifted so quickly that there they are. So yeah, but mostly they're just making sure we're ready for when we come back from spring break, which is going to be when things really get exciting, unfortunately.
My husband's class, he told me this morning that his class solicited that the first session back from spring break would be over soon.
Oh,
I don't know, they just want longer spring break.
yeah, right.
If
If it's a Tuesday, by then I think people will have responded, but if it's Monday, depending on where they're all planning on going. I suppose that's a school level decision.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily advise against it. Okay, so Charlotte, are we live? All right, so Charlotte, we're starting now. So the topic today is teaching in all of its forms, including mentoring, including other kinds of program creation, and how you can engage in those activities, plan those activities, balance them with the other demands, and then document your contributions. And thinking about the criteria, if you're looking to establish excellence in teaching, that generally requires a reputation well beyond IU. And there are certain activities that would be expected. At the campus level, you are not required to have teaching-related publications, but that's one of the more common things that we see in some of the school-level criteria for excellence in teaching. If you're thinking about a balanced case, you're looking to establish very good. And most of the language, both at the school level and campus levels, has to do with a footprint, and I think the language right now is something along the lines of well beyond your unit. So it doesn't say it has to be an international reputation. It's not necessarily about the scholarship of teaching and learning, although it might be. It could be program creation. It could be recognition outside your department or outside your school for the contributions you've made. So an example might be that you've created a program that attracts people from all over in the summer to IU. That's a little bit different than scholarship of teaching and learning where you're publishing in certain venues, but it's also a recognizable activity that could have been a contribution that's really had an impact beyond. So we can talk a little bit about the kinds of things that might fit into that. I want to give you as a backdrop the eDossier folders, but we won't spend a lot of time talking about those necessarily. When you go to create a dossier for promotion, this purple sheet shows you what the electronic format looks like. For those of you who went through an electronic tenure process already, this is familiar. You'll recall that there are folders that you don't see and folders that you do see. So the only thing that I'd like to remind you here in the context of the folders that you do not see is that for documenting teaching, one important component is the solicited letters related to teaching. Those in some units have well-established procedures, and in others you might need to have a conversation to see how this works. But what this is, your chair or academic dean, depending on the unit you're in, will write directly, oftentimes, to former students and say, so-and-so is up for promotion. We invite you to provide feedback. And it happens a little bit differently in different schools and different units. So you might find that your unit goes in, takes all the A's and B's and picks 5% of them. In my unit, they asked us to submit a list. In some units, they're very, very clear. This cannot be a student who's currently enrolled. It has to be someone who's already left the university. In other cases, it might just need to be a student that's not in session with you at present. And they send out those letters. When they come back into your chair or academic dean, they go in this folder of the dossier. So I'm saying all of this because it's not a part that you'll see or that will trigger that, but it's a conversation you should have as you move toward that process. And you simply need to say, how does this work in our unit? And if the answer is I don't know, then you can develop a procedure for making sure there are some letters. And the reason those are solicited by someone other than yourselves is precisely because it gives an arm's length credibility. So if we move then to the folders that you do control, this is the very same list on this orange page with some ideas about how to fill in the folders. And you'll see that we have all of the folders annotated. And for those of you who've been to workshops already, for example, on the service one, there are some ideas about what goes in some of those. But in the teaching section, which starts at the second page, you'll see that we've given you some examples of what might go into those folders. So again, we're starting with where you document, and then we can talk about how to document. Some of the things that you might think of, for example, putting student evaluations in. There's a university policy that says you must put in the feedback from the required questions. You should put all of your student evaluations in there. However, there are some best practices regarding that, like a summary page, for example, of which courses you taught, how many students were enrolled. And there are absolutely no requirements that you present those data in a particular way. So when you make that cover sheet, it's a great strategy to go through your course evaluations and look at what do your students notice about you? What are the positive things they say? It may be that you're enthusiastic. It may be that you really know your content. It may be that you're available outside of class. It's going to be different for each person. But if you notice that you are consistently rated very well on particular items, there's no harm in creating a table that says on this item, look how it was rated across all of these classes, all of these sections. So take some ownership of how you present that data. You can guide your reader through looking at those. You might summarize comments. You can do a lot of different things. You have to include them, but you don't have to leave them by themselves without any interpretation. So do take some time to say, well, for better or for worse, these numbers may have all kinds of issues associated with them, but student comments can be positive and negative. What are the positive things they're saying about you? Does it actually have to do with who you are in the classroom? That might be a great source of how to contextualize the information that's there. If your students say this class was really hard, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Particularly if you can couple that with this person really knew their content. They really pushed me. Those are actually really important things to know about your classroom teaching. Things like mentoring fall into a lot of different folders, and you can be thoughtful about how you present that. So it might be graduate training, but you might be in a unit that doesn't do a lot of graduate training or even have graduate students. So then mentoring might be a completely different kind of activity, right? It might be out of classroom contact in other ways. It might be just that in your office hours, there's a constant stream of students. Sometimes students you had 2 semesters ago because they know you'll sit down and answer their questions. And those are the kinds of things that you can document over time and that you can include in your dossier as part of your mentoring. Another word about speaking to your chairs, unit directors, academic deans, depending on where you're housed, there should be peer evaluations in your dossier, particularly when it comes to promotion. We find, one the semester before someone went up, and it's not really to your benefit. It's not to your unit's benefit to have it looking that way. It needs to be something that's happening over the long term. Some schools have a formalized process. There's someone who's responsible. There's someone who receives an assignment to come observe your teaching. And in other units, it's not formalized yet. And you may need to initiate the conversation with your chair. Should I be inviting people? Will you be inviting people? How many do you think I should have over my time and rank? And those can take a lot of different forms too. They should be useful to you. It's not simply a letter that says, oh, this person's great, but it should give you some feedback that's useful. So part of making that work for you, beyond filling a folder in a dossier, is to make sure that you understand the process that works in your unit, that once you know someone will visit your class, you give them the relevant information beforehand. You have a conversation. These are my goals for the class that you'll visit. This is my syllabus. This is the prerequisite for that course. So set them up to understand very well what's going on in your class, and then make sure you follow up with them to get the feedback that might help you. Sometimes they just notice something about students that you can't see because you're in the front of the classroom, and they say, you know, there's this group over here that's really on task, but they're so quiet, they don't volunteer, and I wanted to make sure you knew they're totally on board. You should call on them and bring them into the conversation. Those are the kinds of things that someone in the back of your classroom can let you know. Now, in my own case, I've also had someone say, a student who is just sitting there checking their email, their phone's in their lap, despite the policy. You probably are well aware of that from wherever you stand in the classroom, but it's also helpful to have that kind of feedback. Even more importantly, what I learned from observing classes and also from having people observe me is, you know, when I taught that, there was this activity that worked so well to help them apply that knowledge. And so you share material. So if it's a very formal, this is a letter for your dossier process, you can still force that into being formative to helping you learn about how to try new things in your class over the long term. And I encourage you to do that, because otherwise it just, it fills a folder, but it doesn't serve the purpose of helping you engage more. So for peer evaluation, start with your chair if you don't know how this should be happening. Associate professors still need to have this done. One of the questions that comes up is, who counts as a peer? That's not defined in the same way that voting rights are defined. A peer is someone who knows about the class you're teaching. Maybe they also teach it. Maybe they teach a course that comes before or after it. So it doesn't have to be only full professors walking into the classrooms as associate professors. Oftentimes, a peer is genuinely a peer. Sometimes it's the director of graduate studies or undergraduate studies. It can be people that fulfill a variety of roles. It may be dictated in your unit, but if it's not the same as a voting right. It's just someone who comes and has some knowledge and can share some feedback. A note, we'll get to this in a second, but CETL, the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, will come and observe, and they will give you feedback. They will not write an assessment or a dossier, because that is not their intention. Their intention is to give good feedback over the long term and help you teach more effectively. So they don't want to produce these evaluative letters, because that sort of impedes their goal of giving you good advice. So go and work with them, but that doesn't count as a peer review. And that's by design, and I think it's important to have both of those things available to you. The only other folder that I'd like to talk about before we continue is learning outcomes. This is the other one that we'll see empty sometimes, and it shocks me, probably only because now I'm in the role that I'm in. But if there are no learning outcomes, it means students gain nothing from their time with you, and I just know that that's not true. So it must mean we need to talk about how to show learning outcomes, because I'm sure that students are gaining something from their time in class. So you can be thoughtful about, what do they get from their time in class? What are my goals for students? How do I know if they've met those goals? And these are things that I think we think about all the time, but when it comes time to creating a dossier, sometimes that gets skipped, or it's hard to look back and say, how am I going to show this? One of the things that many of you who are early in rank have time to do. If your unit allows, I've been adding OCQ questions. At the end of my student evaluations, you're allowed to go in and change the text, not change, add. You can add open-ended or you can add Likert scale questions. So think about what you want your students to get out of class. For me, one thing that I wanted to make sure they could do was carry on the work of curiosity. So one of the questions I asked was, I can find an article in this field and read it on my own. To me, that was really important. I just wanted them to have gotten a skill set as undergrads to be able to go and enjoy this with enough support that they could function as intelligent readers. So they come in. They evaluate that, and then I have semesters and semesters of evidence of which percentage of my students felt like they were getting that skill. If you put that the first time and you realize none of them think they can do it, some of that might mean that you need to tell them they can do it, show them they can do it, and you try experiments. But some of it may be that they're not connecting the dots. So it's good feedback too, but over the long term, that's a great way to show that your students are getting what you hope they are, or to identify what they're not. You can also look at course assignments. When you give an assignment, how many of them are succeeding in meeting the goals for the assignment? If you know 3 years out that you want to be able to show that, you can collect sample work, you can say what the goals were, you can say this student did it, this student almost got there, and you can see what they need to work on. So I went back and I changed the assignment to make sure everybody practiced this one component. You have time to sort of show this cyclic engagement with making sure students are meeting the goals that you've set for them over the long term. So that's the documentation portion. That's the end goal. Now let's step back a little bit and talk about what you can think about. This is also contextualize the green sheet just in how to write a statement about teaching. It covers many of the same topics. Thinking about putting together your narrative for teaching. So we're going to jump now to this. I have a name for this colored paper in my office, and I forget, but it's sort of like ecru is what I would say. Beige-ish page. And what I hope to do now that you've seen the end game, which is to create this dossier that shows your fabulous teachers working toward meeting the criteria for either excellent, very good, or effective, depending on the case you hope to present. Now let's talk a little bit about engagement in teaching, how you can show that, how you can think about it, how you can revise that over the long term. So if you look at this triangle, the intent there is to give you a way to think about the various types of evidence that you might present. And so you have yourself as evidence. This is your planning, your goals, your syllabi, your philosophy of who you are in the classroom, what you hope to accomplish. You could include videos, sample assignments, other kinds of things. You also have the information from others. Those are peer reviews. You might have a peer who evaluates course materials. There, I don't have the handout here, but I'd be happy to provide it. The libraries have been working with ways to document impact of teaching materials. So you may have an unpublished syllabus course activity. You can archive it electronically and they can see how many hits you get, for example. So there are ways now to show that other people at other places are noticing your materials. One thing that I did inadvertently at first, but then realized that you could do it systematically. A lot of times you'll get emails from peers in the field. How are you teaching this course? Or in my case, I'm going to use your book. Do you have a sample syllabus? So then I was able to search, and I found that the book and my syllabus were being used in a variety of places in different ways, or I could see what was adapted from the information I sent. And so you can track that. You can show which universities are using your materials. You can say, include those emails, although you need it, you can include that as part of your evidence. So that's evidence from others, colleagues off campus and colleagues on campus. And then you have information from students. Part of that is student evaluations, but again, student evaluations can be fraught. If that's all that's in your dossier, that's all we have. We would much prefer to have a lot of additional data points. So student work also comes from students, student accomplishments, student outcomes. That's something that you can control to a much greater degree. And it helps to contextualize, of course, the student evaluations as well. This, again, is the list of folders with some ideas, so it's a bit repetitive. There's one more graphic that I want to talk about, and it's this one. It's on the back page of that handout. So every time I give this workshop, I add arrows and change the direction of the arrows. I think the arrows could probably go in both directions on each of these lines. The point intended is probably more of a personality test, right? If you're a very linear person, this circle is hard to navigate because you can see how everything could influence everything else. But the idea is that teaching is a process. You have an idea, you go give it a whirl. Sometimes it bombs, sometimes it's fantastic. You know that because you're paying attention, and either your students couldn't do it, or they did something new, or they were very uncomfortable, and you need to figure out how to get them to meet those goals in a more comfortable way, whatever the case is. And then you go back to your planning, you reassess, you try something new, and you keep doing this. So you plan, try, engage in evaluation, and then reflect on the plan. This is true whether you are incredibly successful as a teacher or whether you're really struggling. You need to show more than anything else this process of engagement, that you're thinking about it, that you're trying things, that you're paying attention to how well they're working, and you're responding to that. I think mistakenly sometimes we give sort of this sense that you need to have a rags to riches narrative about your teaching. I came in, I struggled, the students didn't like my class, I went to CETL, and now it's perfect. And that's just not, some people come in and do great from day one. Some people really struggle all the time, and it has to do with what they're teaching, or the size of their class, or a variety of other things. How well students are prepared for this elective that they, it can be a lot of different things, right? And those external factors are going to also come into play in the kinds of things that you can try, in the kinds of modifications that you make. But what's most important is that sustained engagement, that there's some kind of intellectual activity related to teaching that you're engaging in over the long term. And when you think about it that way, instead of this, wow, I really need to fix this, it helps you manage student evaluation comments. If it's one comment from one unhappy student, do you change your whole course design? Probably not. But if a lot of students say, this project was so hard, I just wasn't prepared, that's great advice. And you think, okay, I know the project's good. I know I need them to meet that goal, but what can I do to make this a little bit more successful, less painful for them, stronger outcomes in the long run? That kind of engagement goes into your teaching philosophy. It's related to student outcomes. And that's the kind of thing that you want to be thinking about over the long term. I think it's more manageable, right, than expecting this one measure to tell you exactly how well you're doing. In my own case, I spent semesters trying to, well, all I wanted them to do was an annotated bibliography. That should be really easy. However, what I realized the first time I tried it was that they didn't know what an annotation was. So we practiced annotations, and I made them do an annotation for an article that was already assigned in class. It was totally separate. And then I realized, okay, those got incredibly better once we started practicing them on articles where we already agreed on the content. So it was sort of a follow that actually helped them do better on the test, which was a delightful unintended consequence. And I realized I couldn't find anything in my discipline in the library. They hadn't used the right databases. They were using Google instead of going to the electronic databases. So I integrated this activity, which actually I do for my graduate students too. I give them search terms and databases, and they look to see how many hits they get. It's super easy. It's not a hard assignment, but it forces them to use the correct databases and to make sure they can locate it. We do that in September. The project's not due till December. And I've given them the search term, so it still has nothing to do with the project, but it cut down by probably 90% the panicky emails the weekend before. I can't find anything on this topic. I don't know how to get this article. We went through interlibrary loan and how that works. So those are things that you may think that they should know, and maybe they should, but in my case, they sure didn't. And so it just removed some of the barriers. That's a long-term plan, right? You can't fix it all at once. But those are the kinds of things that show you're thinking about it, you're noticing what they're reacting to, what they're succeeding in, and where they're struggling, and making modifications. So those are the kinds of things that you want to think about showing in your dossier. And I think I'll close with this yellow sheet has teaching tips. Many of you cannot follow all of these tips. You were hired to teach a particular course, and you are the content expert, so that is what you'll teach, and it's going to be the same size and the same audience and the same level over the term of your career. Others of you may have opportunities to come knocking, and you can say yes, please, or no, thanks. So the idea is to balance breadth and depth to the extent that you have control over that, so that you're not teaching only one course all the time, but that you're not teaching all different courses all the time, something between those, because it's hard to show engagement and improvement over time if your teaching assignments are varying constantly. You may or may not have control over that. And there are a couple links here that are helpful. And CETL is a great resource. They have grants to help you develop new teaching initiatives. They have support for technology. They have impartial third-party observers who can give you some feedback at zero conflict of interest, and I think that's super helpful as well. I'm going to close and open to questions because I imagine some of you are shooting for very different criteria. So some of you may be thinking, what can I get? How can I focus on my research more? And some of you may want to know, how on earth am I going to get a national reputation? So these are dependent on the case. So we'll close now with the formal remarks. And Charlotte, you can cut the video here.